Hey everybody, it's Will from MachineLovus.com here back with another episode on Startup Tracker, what I'm calling Startup Tracker, essentially a Crunchbase clone, but much more than that, but we will get to it. So in this episode, what we are going to do is take our data, we are going to continue scraping it with Selenium and Beautiful Soup, and we are eventually going to get to this outcome by the end of this episode, which is we have a database of companies that we can query. We can say how many companies had made more than $1 million raised, and we will have a database of many companies with the prospect of getting a lot more in the near future. Okay, so this is a NoSQL database. This is mongodb. We are going to use PyMongo. This is Robo3T. It's a GUI for looking at the data in our database. You can see we have a bunch of startups here. So let's get into it. What I'm going to do is actually drop this database. This is something you don't want to do typically ever, but I'm going to do it so we can walk through the steps here. Okay, so let's get into it. So this is the code that we had before. Remember, we are using this this database, angel.co companies, to get our data. And so we have this database before. Let me just restart and clear output on this Jupyter notebook. And what we could do is we're using Selenium. We are using the WebDriver for Chrome to get to the page. We're waiting for 10 seconds so that the loading here comes up before we start to do anything. Now, what I previously had done would be to try and select. I was trying to select the drop downs here, and I was having some trouble with it. So instead, what I decided to do was to load more companies. You see, there's a more button down here. So what I did is to look at the developer tools. And remember from last video, what we can do is we can look at this div for this more button, and we can copy the XPath here. Okay, so we copy that XPath, and with Selenium, we could say the first more button that we're going to click, we can find that element by XPath, and then that copy that I just did on that more button, I'm going to paste into here, find by XPath. And now I found it. And now I want you to watch here as I have that element now. I call it first more, and I can click it. So let's see. I'm going to exit out of this, the developer tools, and I'm going to click this more button. Okay, and so you see now it's loading this again. Now, unfortunately, in clicking that, I've lost it. So I looked up a second, what I'm calling a second more, to load more companies, right? So now we have 60 companies on this page, and we can keep doing that to load more and more, and so we get more into our database. Now, is this the way that we will scrape the entire site? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that I will scrape the entire site. But anyway, moving on, what we could do is we could take that page, the source from the Selenium driver, and put that into Beautiful Soup so that we can parse it. Okay, so we did all of this before we got our results from the base startup div, and now instead of 20, what I had before, we have 60 results on this page, which is great. We can go through the Beautiful Soup code and find the class names. For example, the third startup on this page should be Woo Sports, which it is. Okay, and so now is the arduous task. I want to get all of this data on these companies into a database, but to do that we need to parse it, and we parse it by going through the tedious task of looking at the HTML page, which we did in the last video, and finding out this information. And so here, all of this code, all of it does is tries to parse out for each of the startups this information. So it looks at the divs, looks at the name. We have name, pitch, when they joined, the value, the company size, etc. Okay, so now let's get into it. What we want to do is we want to bring a database into the mix. And so essentially all the code that I have here, well, let me go through it. So I essentially, this is pre-database. This is just cleaning up the data to get it into the database. We have a list of data. What we're going to have is a list of dictionaries that are going to be all the startups on this page. And I call this data, and I call this datum. So a list of dictionaries. So 4 results in the results of the page. I get the name of the company, their pitch, the website, and the stage. Okay, so that's everything that we have extracted. So all of this scary text is just beautiful soup. Me looking at the page HTML in Developer Tools, finding the HTML piece for the name, the pitch, when they joined, all of this, and pulling it out. So as I mentioned, things like joined, location, market, company size, and what is this? Column raised, the raised amount. Some of this stuff is nested in other divs. So all this code does is essentially goes through those and pulls it out into a neat format. Okay, so now let me comment out this piece to show you what we get if we just run that. If we just say, what do we get? Well, what would we have? Just so you could see. Name, pitch, website, stage. Let's see what we would have if we just do that. Datum, name equals name. Let's see, datum. Let's do pitch equals pitch. And then let's do something like raised. So what does this data look like if we just do it that way? Okay, now you'll see that we did get the data for this company, Instamotor. Okay, it did pull it out, but it's not cleaned up. It has these escape characters, new lines, and the amount that's raised is not something that we could put in a database and query against because it has the $ character, it's string, it has commas in it. So we need to clean up this data. We don't want our data to have these new line characters in our database. Okay, so to get around that, what we do is define a function within our script and say we can pass a variable that's name. We stringify the variable if it's not a string, which it probably is, but just to be safe, our strip removes white space at both ends. Okay, so the beginning and the end, it will remove the white space if there is any on the string. And then I'm going to replace the new lines with nothing. Okay, so search and replace. And then I'm going to return that variable. Now for the dollars, what I need to do is first say, well, one, if they haven't raised anything, if it's just this kind of ticker, and you find this out by doing it, but then you just return none. We want to say that doesn't exist. It's not that they raised 0. You don't necessarily want to return 0 because maybe they have raised something and this database doesn't know about it. So I'm going to return none. But instead, if they have raised something, what I'm going to do is turn it. I'm going to strip out the white space, strip out the new line characters, replace the $ with nothing, replace the commas with nothing. But instead of returning a string, I'm going to return this as a float, which is something that we can use in our database to actually clean this up. And so what I get here is I get the name of the company, the pitch, the website, the stage that it's at, when they joined, their location, their market, their company size, and how much they've raised. And now what you can see is this data for Instamotor goes from this to this, right? So it's all of this data that we'll be able to put in our database from this site, and we will start to have this data. Okay. So now let's introduce PyMongo and Mongo Client. So the GUI that I showed you before is Robo3T, and I'm not going to go through how to set this up. You can look that up, or if you like a video on it, let me know, and I will walk through setting up Robo3T. But essentially what we're going to do is use PyMongo. Okay, so from PyMongo, import the Mongo client, and then instantiate a new client. We're going to use localhost. This is just the standard stuff that we can say. The standard stuff that you'd find in any introduction to PyMongo. And then the database that we're going to use is Start Tracker. So in my local database, I have these other databases that I tinker around with, but I have this new database called Start Tracker, and that's what we want to connect to. And then we have a company's collection. So here's a database. We have different kinds of database, and then within the database you have different collections. So that can be like companies, employees, blog posts, other things, other groupings of data that naturally make sense. Note, you want to be careful with NoSQL databases, because it's really hard to do joins. If you think about joins in SQL, if you're used to that, NoSQL, it's more difficult to do those sorts of things. And so collections should be their own encased entities, if you will, their own solitary pieces that can sit alone. Okay, so once I'm connected to the database, all I do is that we have this data. It's in these dictionaries. And so it's because we've cleaned it up so nicely, you'll notice here's my database. I don't have any collections. But right now, what I'm going to do is creates the collections companies, right? And then it inserts into the database one record. So for each company, I'm inserting that record into the database. And I just ran this, and if I rerun it, I'm going to insert more records. Okay, so now I have a company's collection, and now it's populated. You saw me drop it before. Now it should be 60 records we had, and we do have. So I just do a count on the database here, and I get 60. And now I can do sorts of things to where we can look at, for example, raised values, and we can see, for example, find me all the companies where raised is greater than this amount, right? So, and then you can actually sort. So here are the companies that have raised more than, let's do something a little bit more. This is 4.5, let's say $5 million, raised more than $5 million. Okay, startups that have raised more than $5 million, okay? And then we're gonna sort on raised so that we can see who's raised the most. That -1 should put us in descending order. So that's 3 zeros, 230 million. Acopia, I've never heard of that. Leader in high performance intelligent file virtualization solutions. Stage acquired. Okay, so stage Series C. So we have a little bit, it's kind of annoying that stage, we have stage Series A, stage Series B, stage Series C, stage acquired. But that's a little bit of data cleaning that we might take up later on. So that's it. Now we have a database of startups. So we can start tracking, we could start performing analytics, we can start using this data locally for the kinds of things that we want to do to build out more of our startup tracker. Okay, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for subscribing, for liking this video. Please stay tuned. Please hit that bell for more updates, more videos. We are going to continue with this. Let me know your thoughts, your comments, where we should go next, how we should visualize this data, if we should scrape more data, where we should get that data from. I will see you in the next video.